Lufthansa Flight 540. Lufthansa Flight 540 was a regular flight from Frankfurt, Germany to Johannesburg, South Africa, with a planned stop in Nairobi, Kenya. The plane, a Boeing 747 named Hessen, had 157 people on board, 139 passengers, and 18 crew members. After landing in Nairobi, the crew prepared to take off again for the final leg to Johannesburg. But something went wrong during takeoff from Nairobi. As the plane started to lift off, the pilots felt unusual shaking. Still, they continued with the takeoff, raising the landing gear and tried to climb. But the plane didn't gain enough height. Instead, it suddenly lost lift and crashed just a short distance from the runway. It hit a small road, broke apart, and caught fire. Sadly, 59 people were killed in the crash. Investigators later found out what happened. The plane's leading edge slats, which helped generate extra lift during takeoff, had not been deployed. These slats stay retracted unless a valve is open to let air move them into position. The flight engineer had not opened those valves, so the slats remained retracted. Without the slats, the aircraft couldn't generate enough lift and stalled shortly after takeoff. The cockpit warning system didn't alert the crew because it wasn't designed to detect that specific issue. Although warning lights were showing the slats hadn't deployed, the pilots may have missed them, possibly due to a glare from sunlight in the cockpit. Lufthansa Flight 005. Lufthansa Flight 005 was a short domestic flight in West Germany on January 28, 1966. The plane, a Convair CV-440, was flying from Frankfurt to Hamburg with a stop planned in Bremen. On board were 46 people, including 7 members of the Italian national swimming team, their coach, and a sports journalist. They were all headed to a competition in Bremen. As the plane approached Bremen Airport, the weather was poor. It was raining heavily, visibility was low, and there were thick clouds. The wind was also blowing from behind the aircraft, which made landing more difficult. The crew tried to land on runway 27, but just a few meters above the ground, the captain decided to abort the landing and try again. Unfortunately, after starting the go-around, the plane turned left, lost lift, and stalled. It crashed into a field about 1,300 feet past the runway. The impact caused a fire and sadly, everyone on board died. Investigators found that several things went wrong. One of the plane's instruments may have given false readings, causing the pilots to come in too high. Because it was dark and visibility was poor, the captain may not have realized how far down the runway he was until it was too late. When he tried to go around, the aircraft pitched too steeply and stalled. Lufthansa Cargo Flight 527. On July 26, 1979, Lufthansa Cargo Flight 527 was scheduled to fly from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil to Dakar, Senegal. It was a cargo flight operated by a Boeing 707-330C, a large jet used to carry freight over long distances. There were only 3 crew members on board, no passengers. The flight took off as planned from Rio's Galeão Airport, but shortly after takeoff, things went wrong. Air traffic control instructed the pilots to climb and increase their speed. The crew followed those instructions, but the plane was still flying at a low altitude, too low for the high speed it was traveling. As a result, the aircraft moved too far along its route too quickly and didn't have enough height to clear the rising terrain ahead. Just a few minutes after departure, the plane flew against a bunch of trees and crashed into a mountain. The crash caused a massive explosion and all 3 crew members were killed instantly. Investigators later found that both air traffic control and the pilots made errors. Controllers asked the plane to fly faster than what's considered safe at low altitudes. On top of that, there was poor communication about how high the aircraft should have been. The crew likely didn't realize they were heading straight toward a mountain until it was too late. Lufthansa Flight 502. Lufthansa Flight 502 was an international passenger flight that took off on January 11, 1959. The plane, a Lockheed L-1049G Super Constellation, was flying from Hamburg, Germany to Buenos Aires, Argentina. It had planned stopovers in Frankfurt, Paris, Dakar, and Rio de Janeiro. On board were 29 passengers and 10 crew members. As the flight neared Rio de Janeiro, the weather wasn't great. It was raining and visibility was low. Air traffic control cleared the plane to descend over Guanabara Bay to get ready for landing on runway 14. But something went wrong. The aircraft flew too low during its approach. Its nose wheel touched the water, which threw off the landing completely. The pilots tried to continue, but they lost control and the plane crashed near Flecherias Beach just short of the runway. The crash was violent and a fire broke out. Tragically, 36 people were killed. Only 3 crew members survived, the co-pilot, a steward, and a stewardess. Investigators couldn't find a single clear reason for the crash, but they believe pilot error played a big role. The aircraft descended below safe altitude, likely because the crew was tired. Even though they hadn't gone over Germany's flight time limits, they had exceeded the limits set by Brazil, which may have affected their performance. Lufthansa Flight 2904. Lufthansa Flight 2904 was a passenger flight from Frankfurt, Germany to Warsaw, Poland on September 14, 1993. The aircraft was an Airbus A320 carrying 64 passengers and 6 crew members. Everything was going normally until the plane approached Warsaw's Okęcie Airport, where bad weather was starting to roll in. Air traffic control warned the pilots that another aircraft had just reported wind shear near the runway. To stay safe, the Lufthansa crew decided to land at a slightly higher speed than usual. That's a common practice in windy conditions. What they didn't know was that the wind had shifted. Instead of a crosswind, they were now facing a strong tailwind. Something they hadn't been told about because the control tower didn't have updated weather data. The tailwind made the plane land farther down the runway than normal and at a higher speed. Because of the way the Airbus A320 is designed, the plane's brakes, thrust reversers, and ground spoilers didn't activate right away. These systems only kick in when the plane senses full weight on both landing gear struts, and in this case, the left gear didn't touch down until several seconds after the right one. By the time everything kicked in, it was too late. The aircraft ran out of the runway. The captain tried to steer it away from obstacles, but the plane crashed into an embankment and hit an antenna. A fire broke out, and while most people survived, one pilot and one passenger lost their lives. Many others were injured. Lufthansa Boeing 720. On December 4, 1961, a routine training flight turned tragic for Lufthansa when one of its Boeing 720-030B aircraft, DABOK, nicknamed Düsseldorf, crashed shortly after takeoff. The aircraft had only been in service since April of that year. But unfortunately, this crash became the first fatal accident and total loss involving the Boeing 720, a model that had only started deliveries earlier that year. The flight was meant to be a routine training session, departing from Frankfurt Main Airport and heading toward Cologne Bonn Airport. On board were 3 crew members, including Captain Sussman, who had previously averted a disaster when he successfully handled a cargo shift mid-flight just 2 months earlier. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft climbed to 6,000 feet over the Nerstein beacon. Air traffic control instructed the crew to turn right toward the Rudesheim beacon and climb to 9,000 feet. The crew acknowledged the instructions, but moments later, the plane lost control. It flipped upside down, went into a steep dive, and crashed into a field near Ebersheim, about 14 miles west of Frankfurt. The impact caused a massive explosion, completely destroying the aircraft and killing all 3 crew members. Investigators were never able to determine the exact cause of the crash. However, one theory suggested that a failure in the hydraulic control system might have jammed the control surfaces, making it impossible to recover the aircraft. Lufthansa Boeing 720-030B. On July 15, 1964, Lufthansa's Boeing 720-030B, registered as DABOP and named Bremen, took off from Frankfurt Main Airport for a routine training flight. The goal was to practice different maneuvers to keep the crew sharp and qualified. There were no passengers on board, just 3 crew members. The plan was simple: climb over southern Germany, complete the exercises, and return to Frankfurt. The aircraft reached 13,000 feet and started the training drills. At some point, the pilots attempted an aileron roll, a full 360-degree rotation around the plane's axis. This was an extremely risky move for a commercial jet like the Boeing 720, which wasn't built to handle that kind of stress. Surprisingly, they pulled it off the first time, but instead of stopping, they tried it again. During the second roll, the plane flipped upside down and went into a dive. This time, there was no recovering. The aircraft broke apart midair at around 4,000 feet, scattering debris over a large area near Ansbach, Germany. The impact even sparked a forest fire, and tragically, all 3 crew members lost their lives. Investigators later confirmed that the crash was caused by unauthorized aerobatic maneuvers. The plane wasn't designed to handle the extreme stress of such rolls, and the second attempt led to structural failure. Lufthansa and Boeing both had strict rules against these kinds of stunts, making the accident a clear violation of safety procedures. Lufthansa Flight 649. Lufthansa Flight 649 was a routine international flight from Tokyo to Frankfurt, with planned stops in Hong Kong, Bangkok, New Delhi, and Athens. On February 22, 1972, the flight had just landed in New Delhi and was heading toward Athens. There were 172 passengers and 15 crew members on board. About 30 minutes after takeoff, 5 armed hijackers took control of the plane. They claimed to be a popular front for the liberation of Palestine and forced the pilots to change course. At first, they wanted to land on a remote desert airstrip, but the crew managed to negotiate, and the plane safely landed at Aden International Airport in South Yemen. The hijackers then made a serious threat. They would blow up the plane unless the West German government paid a $5 million ransom. After tense negotiations, Germany agreed, paid the ransom, and secured the safe release of all passengers and crew. The hijackers eventually surrendered. After the incident, investigators focused on security lapses at airports, especially in New Delhi. Experts pushed for stricter pre-boarding checks and better international security coordination. This hijacking became a major turning point, leading to much tighter airline security rules worldwide. The incident overall had no fatalities. Lufthansa Flight 181. Lufthansa Flight 181, also known as Landshut, was a routine flight from Palma de Mallorca, Spain, to Frankfurt, Germany on October 13, 1977. The aircraft, a Boeing 737-230C, had 87 passengers and 5 crew members on board. It was a simple trip, mainly carrying travelers from the popular holiday spot in Mallorca to Frankfurt, a major German airport. About 30 minutes after takeoff, 4 armed hijackers from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine took control of the plane. The leader, Zohair Yusuf Akachi, who called himself Captain Mahmoud, demanded the release of 11 Red Army faction members in Germany and 2 Palestinians in Turkey, along with a $15 million ransom. This was all part of the German Autumn, a period of terrorist attacks meant to pressure the German government. The hijacking dragged on for 5 days, with the plane being forced to land in multiple countries, including Italy, Cyprus, Bahrain, Dubai, Aden, and finally Mogadishu, Somalia. In Aden, the hijackers killed the plane's captain, Jürgen Schumann, accusing him of disobeying their orders. His co-pilot, Jürgen Vitor, was then forced to take control. The crisis ended in Mogadishu when, in the early hours of October 18th, Germany's elite counter-terrorism unit, GSG-9, with help from Somali forces, stormed the aircraft. 3 of the hijackers were killed, and all passengers and remaining crew were rescued with only minor injuries. This operation was seen as a huge success in counterterrorism. It showed how effective specialized rescue teams like GSG-9 could be and emphasized the importance of international cooperation in fighting terrorism.